good evening, and welcome to the Chronicles of Rohn here at Intellectual Radio, iHeart Intellectual Radio. I'm your host, Alan Campbell, and in studio we have our co-host, Karen Ford, and we have a special guest in here tonight. He's going by the name of Jeremy. Now, first thing, like I always do, is I go into some news topics. Now, if this what's been in the news recently is the young girl Samaja, the 16-month-old that was found, I should say, found dead in a home in Joliet. Now, what's really that's the disturbing part, but the most disturbing part is that the house that this 16-month-old was found in burned to the ground. Burned to the ground. Now, officials are saying that they believe that this was arson. Okay, now we at this particular point we can speculate, but it's starting to look that way. But that's just one of the things that's really a little unsettling. So, but we're going to jump right into tonight's show. Tonight's show on the Chronicles of Rohn, we are going to discuss what we're going to discuss is mental health and illness. And this is something that we do not talk about in the Black community. We don't do it because some reason or another, we feel that it's somewhat taboo. You know, we've all seen that show. We've all seen Martin Lawrence's show. What's that? You're So Crazy. And he always had that little skit, crazy, deranged. Well, and we laugh about it, but it's not funny when you're the person that they're talking about. It's not funny. Or as they say, it's no fun when the rabbit got the gun. It isn't. And what happens is that we get to a point, and we've all been at, and it's not a person out there. And if you say that you're not, you're a liar. We all have somebody in our family that is not together. And we don't find that out until their cheese slides off their cracker. And when we find out that happens, that's either at a family function where somebody didn't had too much to drink and they get to telling all the family secrets, and then or somebody say, oh, you know what, he's not your daddy anyway because he's crazy. Look at him, look at your kids. Then all the personal business comes out, and now feelings is hurt. But see, or you have that one particular relative that you don't see but 3 times a year. That's Christmas, Mother's Day, and Easter. That they got him or her stuffed in a back room somewhere. And growing up, I had a particular uncle, and we used to think that, okay, hey, it's something wrong with this guy. He's not wound too tight, because he would just run through the house and do a couple of jumps and hit the top of the doorpost like he was slamming a basketball. And you're 10 years old and you scratching your head like, what the hell is wrong with this dude? It's a grown man. But you start to think about this as you get older, saying, okay, there is some breakdown someplace. Getting into that, getting that is that the number in America of people who suffer from mental illness, that suffers from mental illness, is 42.5 people in America. 42.5 of people in America. Now, out of the 42.5, out of that, 6.8 of that is African American. Let me rephrase that: blacks, because I'm not going to say African Americans. I'm going to say black people. 6.8. That's 16% of the total population of America. That's and 16% of anything that's not good is really, really bad. It really, really is. It truly is. And it's astounding that we have that many people. And when we break that number down, we have it's 8% of those people out of the 16%, 8% of those people are incarcerated because they have mental issues. Now that's half of everyone that is suffering from mental issues or some form of mental problem or deficiency. And we have to and when we say mental deficiencies and mental problems, we are talking about bipolar, schizophrenia, depression, anxiety, a few other things that we talked about, and all of these encompass that particular thing. As blacks, we don't address these because we don't want to feel ostracized, even though we feel disenfranchised and ostracized because we're black. We don't want to add any more to the mix. But it's a difference when we're classified as having mental illness opposed to white America. It's a total different aspect. It really is.
That's true. And I saw some of the same statistics you did. Mental Health America was one of the places that I looked, and they stated that. And they were also talking about the fact that, blacks are more likely to have feelings of worthlessness than white people. And that's generally, obviously, that's societal. But the thing of it is that once we take it in, we keep forgetting that whatever goes in eventually has to come out. If it does not come out, if we don't find healthy ways of addressing that, then mental health steps in. Now, some things are hereditary. Some things happen because they happen. You may have a child or somebody and they develop something. They may develop schizophrenia as a young adult, like people do with asthma. But overall, we internalize so much as Black people. And I was reading an article from Ebony in 2012, and it's about how we suffer in silence, and the fact that a lot of our reluctance to deal with this stems as far back as slavery. And it was because we saw so much, and so much was done to us as a people, that the way to survive it was to remain strong, was to stay strong. And so strength was equated with survival, and weakness with not surviving. And thus we see mental illness as a weakness as opposed to something that's very real.
Exactly. And what we're going to do is that I'm going to introduce Jeremy and let Jeremy really give us some insight, because Jeremy himself has suffered from a form of mental illness. Am I correct?
Yes, you are. I suffer from depression and bipolar disorder, and it is something that has probably been developing for a large part of my early adulthood, very much without the realm of my knowledge. And I feel as though a lot of the reason that it had gone unchecked so long is because the way I had been taught to be a man was deeply predicated in the idea that if I were to ask for help, if I were to ask for assistance, if I were to be vulnerable with anyone about my mental state and the things that were really going on with me, that it would somehow make me weaker. Suicide is the third leading killer of men in this country. And I had actually attempted suicide about 3 times this calendar year. And I ended up staying in mental institutions twice where I got diagnosed. And it was something that I was pretty much dealing with alone. I let a couple of friends in eventually, but by then I had already tried to kill myself and they had already stopped me. And imagine what would have happened had they not been there.
And I'm glad you brought that up too, because I myself, and when we talk about mental illness and particularly suicide, and sometimes they have what they call suicider's guilt, suicider's remorse, and then you have other people what they call suicide survivors. Now, when we breaking down the part of suicide survivors, it's not someone that has committed suicide. Those are the suicide survivors are the ones that are people that are left behind by one who has committed suicide. And I myself am a survivor. My brother committed suicide in '09. And that's where you begin to really understand that there is a breakdown someplace. We don't know what it is or where it is. And once we get a full understanding of what's happening, now it's our job, our duty to address it, keyword address it, not deal with it. And addressing and dealing with things, addressing and dealing are two different things. You're dealing with it. Dealing with it means that you know it exists, and so you're just going to kind of do whatever you can to get by, but addressing it and saying, hey, we need to do follow-up treatment. We need to understand why you're at this point. And the other thing that you mentioned, and we when you said adulthood life, a lot of people do not know that they are suffering from some form of mental health or mental illness, I should say, until they get to their adult life, because now there are a lot of things that are starting to be added into their lives. They may be developing a family, they may be having job issues, they may be having relationship issues, other things start to come into that. So now you're by yourself, you don't have that lifeline where it may be your parents or your siblings. And so now when this happens, and this is very important to really understand what is going on. And when you get to and in your adult life, to where now you're able to deal with this. And then the other part is that if you are with someone, your significant other, who may not know, who may not recognize the signs, who are not familiar with any form of mental illness, they may think this is that you're going through some type of anger issue, some type of phase, whatever it is that it may be. That's where you and that person have a conversation. You have an in-depth conversation. Listen, sweetie, or listen, hon, this is what's happening with me and what's going on, and I need, to help me. Now, you're not going to always get this, and if you're not going to always get somebody that's going to say, well, I want to stay, I'm not going to stay in this, I'm not going to get involved. And the whole idea is that they don't want to get involved because they don't understand it. They don't understand that you are dealing with a lot of different things. Some people may say, well, my goodness, he completely lost his bearings over the fact that a box of cereal wasn't put back in the cabinet in a particular way. But it's not about the cereal. It's a culmination of things that has happened that they have been subject to or privy, that just seems like they're out of order. Compulsive disorder is a form of mental illness, where if you, and this is true beyond belief, you will go into someone's house who is a truly compulsive individual, to where they will have everything in their cabinet. I'm talking about from dry goods to canned goods, all perishables, non-perishables, and they will be put in a cabinet or in a refrigerator in alphabetical order. I kid you not. It's the most amazing thing you want to see. And you're saying, well, someone is being anal retentive. No, that is just how their mind is operating and working. Someone with bipolar disorder, it's a combination of highs and lows. Some people's bipolar, it may be they may be completely off the chart, and then you have where that's the level of anxiety to, and then the reverse on that is bipolar, is that they will have the lowest of the lows. He'll be someone that sleeps all day, that just can't seem to get it together, and their days begin to run into each other, one after another.
I'm living that right now.
And so
I'm living that right now.
So that's the thing. So this is where we're addressing it. And I must commend you on recognizing that and addressing, hey, there is a problem.
Right. And I think when we look at the community as a whole, like Karen was saying earlier, our people as a race, as a monolithic entity, and I don't like to think about the Black community as a monolithic entity, because the Black experience is very much subjective and it is very much particular to every individual. But I think there are some things that are shared throughout a culture and throughout a group. And I think one thing that is shared is that we have never had the time to heal from anything. Like slavery happened, the Black codes happened, Jim Crow happened, civil rights movement happened, prison industrial complex, crack happened a decade before I was born.
Right.
Prison industrial complex was not done while crack was happening. It's still happening today. We have all this gang stuff going on. And imagine the sort of climate you're living in, where you are under some sort of constant strain because of the color of your skin, because you live in a white supremacist society, and you've got these things happening to you, and you're living throughout all this trauma. And you don't really have an outlet, and you live in a community where you can't find work. So it's easier to get drug work and it's easier to get a gun. And you've got free reign over a community. There's going to be a lot of violence. There's going to be a lot of crime. There's going to be a lot of murder. There's going to be a lot of people just taking what's inside of them and then bringing it to the community around them. And then you get, some of the stories that you see on the news, and then the media capitalizes on it.
And I was talking with Karen over the weekend, and when we talk about internalize, and that's one of the things that sometimes we tend to do, is that we internalize a lot of different things. The mother of the 16-month-old, this was a woman, or it's been reported, this woman herself has suffered or is suffering from some form of mental illness. But she has 3 children, but she's suffering from some form of mental illness. So the problem is that here it is that once again, we are masking this problem of what is going on, and you're bringing lives into the world that you really are not prepared, that you are not mentally prepared for. You are not prepared. And the sad part about this too, and and this is not me throwing this woman under the bus, and I'm not doing that. What I'm doing is that we have to lay the level of responsibility at the people who recognize this, who see this, or who knew this. Even those individuals who fathered those children bear some form of responsibility. They bear some, because they're like, it's something you have to, certain things you see. There's just things that you see from people that that, hey, there's a little bit of, the equilibrium is not there. It's not there. And when we get to talking about equilibrium, that means it's equal. But if it's a little bit off, hey, something is not going on here. If this person, hey, you went to her house and her house looked like a bomb exploded in it, that in itself is, hey, you scratching your head. Okay, what the hell is going on in here? But then you're gonna proceed on. And when we in addressing what you're talking and what you were saying is recognizing certain things. And we live in an area, and we talked about this once before about technology. We live in a time to where there's absolutely positively no reason or excuse to not know certain things, because you can Google it. Simple. Hey, what are the symptoms of bipolar? What is the symptoms of depression? What is the symptoms of anxiety? What do I need to look for when a person is contemplating suicide? OCD. What do I and ADD and HD? All of these things play in there. So we're no longer 30 years. We're 30 years advanced now, to where now we have all of this, where they have now medication. Now some people, they don't want to take their medication, because the generality is that, hey, I don't want to be on medication all my life. Well, I may be a little biased, but if that's what's going to help keep your choo-choo train wheels on the track, that's what you need to be doing.
That's true. And you also have to remember that those medications for certain types of mental illness, they're not as bad as they used to be. I remember that some people used to take medication and it used to make them lethargic. Some
Correct.
people take a particular medication and it makes them sleepy. So if you have a medication that if there's a medication and that's one of the side effects or whatever, then you take that at night. So that you take the medication at night. You don't take it at 8 a.m. in the morning. You take it at 8 p.m. or 9 p.m. But we also have to remember, because we were just talking about being silent in our community, is that there is so much stigma to being called to having a mental illness. We would never, ever, ever point at someone who has cancer, someone who's had a stroke, somebody who has, any other kind of physical ailment or any other kind of ailment, and point to them, call them out, and discuss them in derogatory terms. We would never, ever do that.
Never.
But we do that to people with a mental illness, not realizing that mental illness is just as real as cancer, as stroke, and whatever. And it can be more insidious because sometimes people don't know it. People who have it don't know it. Like you were saying, you can Google some things, but sometimes people aren't aware. And we make the assumption that, well, I remember seeing a television show and Black lady was saying she was going to therapy. And her friend was telling her, well, Black people don't go to therapy. Black people go to church. Well, you know what? You can do both.
You can
They
definitely.
they are not mutually exclusive, because I'm a firm believer. Yes, you pray to God and you row for the shore. If you stuck out in the ocean, that's what you do. But you don't ignore one for the other. And sometimes people need to talk. People need to do that. And I have nothing against prayer. I pray. But when I'm ill, like I said, I remember telling you guys last week, I suffer from diabetes. I cannot pray my diabetes away. I need my insulin, so I take it. And I will most likely be on insulin for the rest of my life. Do I want to be? No. But and I know we all are going to die, but am I in any rush to go? No. I don't step out in front of trucks. I don't walk on train tracks, and I take my insulin. And if I had to take something for bipolar or whatever, and I had to take it for the rest of my life, I would.
Right. And if I may, I'm actually currently on medication for bipolar disorder and my depression. And I had to talk to my primary care physician about what medicines would work for me so that we could figure out what I needed to do and what I needed to take so that I could be in a situation where I could be healthy, because I have 2 jobs and a full-time school schedule. Like, I'm about to be done with college soon. I got to get through the rest of my life. And I've got medicine that makes me sleepy. I take it at night. I've got a mood stabilizer that helps me stay even throughout the day. Doesn't necessarily make me lethargic, doesn't necessarily put me to sleep, but it's one of those things where if you're taking medication and the side effects are having a certain effect on you that make you sort of non-productive or get in your way, you can get around that. You can talk to your doctor about what's going on with you, if you can even get a doctor, given what our president has just done to the healthcare system,
right?
Which is its own bevy of issues. Because I also acknowledge that there are a lot of people in our community who simply do not have access to adequate health care. So a lot of diagnosing these mental issues and then getting the help you need is just not an option for a lot of people. Sometimes your uncle got to sit in the back room because that's all you can do with your uncle, because you can't get your uncle help.
Right.
And that's sad. It's really sad.
And I have a question for you. And then, Jeremy, this is direct. This is for you. What is a typical day for you? Just a run the mill from the time that you get up, go through it. What is a typical day for you?
A typical day for me. I wake up, depending on if I have work or if I have class, that'll decide what time I wake up. I either wake up at 8 or I wake up at 10, depending on where I need to be and when I need to be there. I take my morning medication. I shower. I get dressed. I'll make myself some breakfast. I'll go to class or I'll go to work. And I'll take some time in the afternoon to do my art. I break dance, I do photography, I paint, I draw, I do a lot. And then I'll spend time with loved ones, and I take about an hour each day now, and I mourn. I was in a 2.5-year-long relationship with someone who I love very much, someone who I thought I was going to spend the rest of my life with. And she is now with someone else, and I mourn the loss of that relationship. I'm happy that she's found the space to move on. I'm just sad that we're not together anymore. And I give myself the space to deal with that, because when I was suicidal, I wasn't.
And that's what we're talking about here. See, when people are suffering, when they're going through it, and I'm gonna correct myself, when they are going through their time, their mental issues, their mental illness, they are functioning just as lucid as any one of us out there that are not taking medication to help us get through the day. And this is what you were just saying, because it's pretty much across the board. And to have gone through what you were just describing, you're dealing with your bipolar, and then a breakup of a relationship, and for some people that's the straw that breaks the camel's back. Exactly. That's what definitely will push people. completely over the edge and say, okay, now maybe she's looking, or maybe they are looking at, okay, I'm a broken human being and there's nothing else that you can do for me, or how do we go about this? I'm just going to stop my own clock. That's never the answer. We have to forge through, we have to get through, but at the same time, we also have to create barriers and a support system for that. We have to, that's where a lot of this comes in, the support system on doing that. We're going to take our first break right here on iHeart Intellectual Radio, the Chronicles of Rohn. Also need to pay some bills for around here too. Our sponsor, luxuryhairdirect.com/buy. That's BY/Nubian4 dot. That's luxuryhairdirect.com/buy. BY/Nubian4 dot. We'll be right back. And we're back. We are back. Hey, we're going to be taking a couple of calls. So if you want to join in this conversation about mental health and illness in the Black community, give us a call here at the station at 708-223-8953. That's 708-223-8953. We're sitting here. I'm Alan Campbell, and I'm sitting here with Jeremy and my co-host Karen, and we are addressing mental health and issues. We years ago, and I think a lot of us who are in the particular age bracket of 50, or who grew up between 75, who grew up between 75 and 85, we made jokes, and a lot of us are guilty of that. We'd always make comments or jokes, about an individual. You're riding the short yellow school bus, or you were in the slow class, remedial class, or you were in the dummy class, all of this. But we didn't fully understand what was going on, because and there was people that even I went to school with, I just behooved. It's like, okay, what's wrong with them? But not knowing that a lot of them were suffering from some form of mental issue, and what they did. And so what society has done, or what the school system did, was instead of really identifying that, it's what they did is it's a form of segregation. Mm-hmm. Say, hey, okay, we're gonna put you in with the smart kids, the cool kids, and then we're gonna put the ones that are not so smart and the uncool kids. We're gonna put you all together, and that's a form of segregation. But and also too, it's humiliating and it's dehumanizing to that individual to say this is what we're gonna do. Well, here's the thing we have to understand. We also need to realize and understand that there's a percentage of us that suffers from dyslexia, meaning that you could see something and for whatever reason, you'll read it in reverse, or you'll flip the numbers around. Like a common number for some people, they'll see 21B. For whatever reason, 21B is so common, but they'll say 12B. It's not that they're slow or stupid. It's just how the mind is processing. And sometimes the mind can process things so quickly that it doesn't have time to actually put them in the proper order. Once we had to remediate, when the school board said, this is what we're going to do, we're going to create a remedial reading class. The difference, what they were saying is that this child could not read. Wasn't the child, or the child, they never used the term, the child had a reading comprehension problem.
No.
They never said that. That didn't come along until people started arguing. Wait a minute, my child, it's funny. I can be sitting at home and my child can read, but he gets to school and it's all of a sudden there's a real problem. No, the problem is that the material that he's looking at is not coincident. It does not work for his mindset. Because what they realized too is that there were some children that were highly intelligent. It's just that the work or the curriculum or the syllabus that the educator was giving them was beyond standard. And so they got bored. The child got bored. So the mind became stale.
Right. When I was in the 5th grade, I was in No Child Left Behind.
Oh,
back when that was the program.
That was an absolute, not to cut you off, but that was an absolute disaster.
Yeah, that was a mess. They really thought that something was wrong with me. Turns out the work was boring and that I was above level. I was reading at college level when I was about 11 years old, and they didn't know, so they misdiagnosed me with some reading comprehension problems, and I ended up in a No Child Left Behind program. But within that program, the teacher often belittled us, and I reported it to my grandfather, who then brought it up to my principal, and it became an issue. But it was one of those situations where when you are in a situation like that, and I am someone who works in the education system, you separate a group of young people, and then you sort of have them in this space where they're getting work that isn't specialized to how each individual child learns, and then you throw them back into a social situation with other children, and then no grander conversation happens with either group about what is going on. So I didn't know what was happening to me until someone broke down to me that I was in a special program, and then the kids around me were making fun of me because they thought that I was dumb. And I'm over here like, why are we stigmatizing people who learn differently or who may need a little bit of extra help? Because that stigma is so dehumanizing, and we end up creating these spaces where we breed hate within school systems. Yeah. And I think that if you're going to move somebody into a room so that you can have an individual learning plan for them that helps them focus, if you're going to put a kid in a room, that way they can focus on doing a test, you know, so that they can be in a quiet setting, that the conversation about tolerance and the conversation about understanding that everybody learns differently, and that doesn't make anyone more than or less than everyone, needs to happen across the board and across the community. And that conversation does not happen. I don't think young people understand the scope or the spectrum of how learning works. So we end up with these polarizing views of, if you're in this room, you must be smart, and if you're in this room, you must be dumb. And it is so much more nuanced than that.
And what that does, it's already tough enough. Now, if this child is suffering from whatever issue, it's already tough enough that now you decide, well, I'm going to separate this child from this. I'm going to separate these children from these children. So now this child feels inept. He feels that he doesn't fit in. So now this only accelerates what may be happening with him. This only accelerates this. When I went to school, we had that where children were separated because this child was not learning as fast as this child. So what we're going to do is that we're going to take this group of children and we're going to grab them, and then we're going to put them in this particular, we're going to put them in the accelerated class. That's what they used to call it, the accelerated class. No, they were just learning at speed. It was that, and then we're going to take this group of children and we're going to put them in this particular class. And if you went to a school where it was probably maybe 3 floors, and the children who were in the remedial classes were always on the first floor. Always on the first floor. It was either classes 100 to 108. You always had, you know, and then you had you had a teacher who that was not familiar with what was going on with each child, because she may have had 15 children in that class. How was she able to accurately to say what's wrong with this child? What does this child need? How can we better this particular portion here? Now that child may go home and the parent is observing that, hey, okay, I'm not seeing what's going on. They're getting to work, they're seeing the work. There's a level of breakdown to where the child is understanding it, but he's not understanding it to where you think they should. And then we're and then we have this, and we have a child that is suffering from some form of mental illness. It's going to continue to go undiagnosed until they get to high school, or even, like you said, adult age. And that's when it really begins to manifest itself, because now the parameters, such as the schooling or someone's constantly there, have been taken away. So now you're forced to deal with these particular things. You're forced to deal with the relationship. You're forced to deal with a job. You may have a boss that's a complete jerk, and he's just riding you only because you're not performing at his level, not company level, but at his level. Then we move over to the part to where the old school, where there's mental health issues, to where we have a family member who's been suffering with this, but it's never been treated. And so now what we do is that we put them off to the side, or if you do bring them out, they're put, all basically, you're at a park. I mean, we've all gone to parks, and we've seen maybe one person by themselves say, oh, no, well, they don't get out much. Well, they have a few issues and things of that nature. Well, that doesn't help them. What you're doing is that you're parading them, and you've done all you can to cover the fact that, hey, our family is broken. And that's one of the things that we don't address as Blacks, and mental illness. Hey, it happens. Some of us are broken. Some of us are broken beyond belief. Some of us are broken to where they can be fixed. It's that we have to take the initiative and saying, this is what we have to do. How do we go about that?
That's why I was thinking about what an important role culture plays in this, because our culture is Black culture is one where we have begun to normalize our suffering. Not only have we internalized it, but we just figure it's normal. You were saying that, we have yet to heal from all of the injustices in every area of our lives as a people, not even as individuals, but as a people. Then we have other people who are not aware of our culture, have not studied our culture, and they start to put labels, like you were saying. You have the kids who are in the smart class, the accelerated class, and the kids who are in the remedial class, not understanding particular cultures, not understanding quite just a number of things. But I think about culture also because when we think about standardized tests, the fact that those do not reflect our culture, and it just something simple. Right over here in the corner of the studio, there's a black couch. Black people say couch. White people say sofa. So if we get a test, and it says, and they show a picture, like kindergarten or first grade, what is this? And the kid says, it's a couch. Because in our community, it's a couch. And then they're told, well, no, that's wrong. That's a sofa. And we're going, I haven't heard of sofa anywhere within my cultural existence, because this is not what we use. It isn't wrong. It's just not what the majority uses.
Right.
So again, we're stigmatized. We're stigmatized by utilizing our own culture, and another culture who's trying to diagnose us or whatever is not taking into account that we are different because we've lived with suffering for so long. And so they tend to misdiagnose. Sometimes they mistreat. And we, as a people, and especially Black men, mistrust medical care to begin with. I mean, Black men will sit there and something is falling off their body, and they will tell you it's okay. You hear Chris Rock talk about his dad saying putting some Robitussin on it and it'll fix it.
Right.
And it is because we have, and again, I say especially with men, not saying that women do not suffer also, but men especially internalize so much. And then we wonder when a man goes off the deep end, he starts shooting somebody. We talked about this earlier. engaging in domestic violence, kicking the dog, or whatever. It's because he's internalized so much suffering. Because from the time he gets up until the time he goes to bed, he is always the angry Black man. No matter where he might be, even when he's smiling, there's always this whatever. White women pass him on the street and they clutch their purses. They cross to the other side. Having to deal with that every day of your life. And it used to be from the time you were a younger Black man. Now we have police officers killing children because they're talking about, well, I was fearing for my life.
Right.
From a 12-year-old child?
He's 12 years old.
From a 12-year-old child? Really?
No, I thought he was grown.
You feared for your life because you thought he was grown? I mean, the child is shorter than me, and I'm short. So, you feared for your life? Really? Because this young Black child looked at you and said, bang?
Yeah. And the other thing is, like I said, and we have another culture, one culture trying to diagnose something. Here's the thing that also too, that the number of Black physician, Black PCP or medical personnel that will diagnose us is very, very small. We don't have, we have a caller coming in. Have a caller. Right. Okay. Moving on. Ready. Bear with us. Yeah, all right. Hey, good evening. Welcome to the Chronicles of Rohn. And who do I have on the line here?
This is Jay from Georgia.
Hey, how you doing, Georgia?
I'm good. So, I think you guys are kind of getting at a lot of points. I'm going to be real. I'm going to try to hit as much as I can, but I'm going to try to be brief. So to the gentleman that is on your show tonight, definitely big ups to you, sir, for having the courage to come out and even talk about such an issue, not just in the African-American community, but in the community of humans at large. So I applaud you for taking the courage to even address it.
Thank you.
That takes a lot.
Thank you very much.
It really does. I know a few people that do suffer from similar situations, and even from the learning disabilities. I myself had dealt with dyslexia, so I understand it. So like I said, I'm gonna try to be quick. The first thing I want to kind of get at is just addressing the stigma of mental health. First of all, it's 2017. So we can talk about and really, really turn the lens backwards as far as we want. But the core issue is, yes, from a community standpoint, we have been subject to the equivalent of PTSD. Okay, that's what we've been kind of abused with, or kind of have been exposed to as a nation of people. We've been dealt with all type of horrendous torture, all type of horrendous type of events. Some are external, some are internal. Still doesn't change the fact that they occurred. When we look at, as you mentioned earlier in the show, the prison industrialization, that was yet another travesty. We look at Jim Crow and the society that or the culture, that supported, and that what it created, the fear that it created, all of the hardship that it created, and the mere terrorism of it. If we want to talk about ISIS and all the other terrorists that this country has ever seen, the Klan and everything that was done under Jim Crow is nothing to be compared with what ISIS does. I mean, we've done more stuff, horrific stuff, in our own backyards than ISIS could ever do. So that has to be atoned for.
I agree.
As it relates to mental health and as it relates to healthcare as a whole, I will say this. Those are things that can be dealt with and that can be addressed if the legislators that we elect would do their job, would quit being the cowards that they are, and quit being the mudslingers that they are and address the American people and deliver on what they promised. Because if we're not careful, this will continue, and the entire issue of whether it's mental health, whether it's United Healthcare or universal healthcare, it's just a smokescreen. So let's understand that. Even the legislation that they're doing now, where they're talking about Medicaid is being cut from the new proposed National Health Care Act and all that other stuff, that's smokescreens. They're not telling you the truth of where funding is trying to be equalized. That's the problem. If you can equalize this whole thing of healthcare, then we can address issues like mental health. Simply put, there are the number that they keep playing with, and we got to be very careful because this is what our country does. We play with numbers and manipulate. We're very keen at masterminding manipulation. It's what we do. So a lot of numbers that they keep throwing out there is 20 million here, another 24 million there, and it never gets over 20 million. But here's the real thing. In this country alone, there are over 320 million. If you were to design any insurance infrastructure or any group infrastructure based upon the base amount of 320 anything, there's no reason on earth that you can't equalize a cost to where all of this could make sense. If that is not true, then how do you think the tax system works? The tax system works based upon, we're looking at incomes based upon what we think our national debt needs to be, and we're taxing the people accordingly. So again, I'm sorry, that's a little tangent, but I'm just trying to throw the point so that we can understand. Don't get caught up in the or the sideshow Bob that they keep throwing in front of us. I'm gonna go back to this whole mental health thing and the education system. The education system or society as a whole, but particularly the education system as it relates to remedial and all of the classifications, I don't really blame them simply because they are having to be the stopgap, particularly in our community as African Americans, to try to give these children an opportunity to play catch up on fundamentals that they're not getting at home. Now, I'm not talking about everybody's house, but I'm talking about a good mass majority that are not getting the fundamentals of education or any sort of fundamental learning so that when they enter into an institution such as the school systems or things like that, that they are equipped or that they're even, for lack of better terms, competent to work amongst their peers. So they're playing catch up, and at certain points it's a stopgap because now they're trying to identify learning disabilities, emotional issues, issues with economic problems in the home, abuse in the home. So they're trying to do a number of different things, and not to say that they're off the hook, but you got to understand their primary focus is to try to educate publicly the population. But now they're spending so much time isolating and identifying who's not fitting that the idea or the level of education or impartation of knowledge is greatly affected. So I'm saying, to really bring it home, if we want to address a lot of the issues, especially that we're talking about here, the first forefront, as with anything, even from a business standpoint, if you want to know how healthy a business is, find out how the owner operates. What does he value at his home? And it's the same thing here. If we want to get in front of all of this other stuff, we have to start looking at our homes and say, wait a minute, what's going on in our home, in our family bloodline, and how can we fix this? And don't go run to no church, because most of the time, pastors are the most ill-equipped idiots to sit in front of you and give you any sort of instruction on how to deal with mental illness. It's not always demonic. There are certain chemical and physiological things that these idiots are ill-equipped to even begin to understand. So I'm going to just close by saying it this way. I think that there is a way for us as a people to re-identify or to really get in front of this, but we got to take the stigma off. Address it, and try to figure out how do we embrace these things, just like we have with homosexuality and all these other little weird things. How do we and at least find a common bound of how we can move forward and get the people with the right help and resources? A lot of that is going to take work, but we can do it if we get the right people in front of us and in the right positions, legislators and all of that, the people we elect.
All right. I mean, that's definitely a mouthful. Thank you. I appreciate you, Georgia. As we always do.
Thank you for that. And I guess one of the things that frightens me when we talk about things like this, we had earlier, or especially the two of you when you were talking about suicide.
Yes.
Frightens me intensely. You think of, you were talking about the 70s, Donny Hathaway.
Yes.
Don Cornelius, most recently.
And the thing about with Don Cornelius and to have survived or be on the end of be the ones that are left behind of a suicide. It's a difficult place, but then you wind up you go through the blame game. You go through what I could have done differently. And with Don Cornelius, and it was said, and his son even said that he was suffering, that Don Cornelius suffered for a long time with mental illness, a long time. But you would never know that by the way that this man worked and operated and put together a particular show. And for those who are not, for those who may or may not, and I'm just doing it for the benefit, Don Cornelius, the creator of Soul Train, the creator, the founder, the namesake of Soul Train. When Soul Train started here in Chicago, and you would never imagine that this man, this brilliant mind, and the scary part is that when you look at some of these things and you say, well, it's a brilliant mind. Yes, when the mind is working in the capacity that it was designed to do. And as our friend from Georgia stated, that mental illness is a combination. We have to get away from the stigma. It is a combination of a chemical reaction imbalance of what is going on inside the mind, to where you may have a little bit too much of serotonin, or you may not have enough of serotonin.
And that happens quite frequently.
It's like trying to push 200,000 gallons of water through a 5-inch pipe. It's not going to happen. You're gonna have a overflow, and you're gonna have a blockage. One of the two is going to happen. So if you have the overflow, then you're really that gets you going. You're at the excitement level or the anxiety. If it's not getting through, then you're at a low level. These are the things that we have to fully understand, and at the same time, we have to learn to recognize these particular things. We use the term crazy in such a reckless way. But don't confuse crazy with intelligence. Don't confuse the two. Just calling someone crazy as being dismissive because you don't want to take the time to understand what's going on with them. You don't want to do that. So if someone is doing something that you don't understand, you say, okay, they're crazy. No, they're going through an issue. The same thing that's going on, the same thing that happens when the police department, and this was something else that really bothered me. And sometimes we have a tendency to do, is that when we have an issue, when we have one of our family members going through a psychotic break or having a breakdown, a meltdown, a massive meltdown to where you can't reach them, what is the first thing we want to do? We want to call the police, who are completely ill-equipped to deal with someone who is having a catastrophic meltdown. So you see a guy that's going down the street, and he's shattering windows in the bus shelter, or he's running down the road, butt naked, rubbing Jello and peanut butter all over him. You say, okay, he's crazy. No, he's having an issue that he's trying to deal with. So then you call Johnny Law, who comes out, who has no idea what he's dealing with, or who he's dealing with, or how do I deal with this? No, that's complete. No, so what you're doing, all you're doing now is that you're inciting more you're getting this person more excited, or you're really getting them to reach a point to where now they don't want to talk to anyone, they don't trust anyone, they don't want to do that.
Right.
Police officers, and this was an issue that happened about 2 years ago. This was a situation that happened 2 years ago, just over on the west side of Chicago. A young man came home from school. He was home for the holidays, and he also had some mental issues. Him and his father had a blowout, had a real bad argument. The son was going through a meltdown. What does the father do? Calls the police. The police comes out. The police have no idea. In the process, the door opens. The officer's in the door. He discharges his weapon. Not only does he kill the individual who he was there to assist, but he kills an innocent bystander. See, and this is the prime example of things going bad, and you're sending the wrong people to put out a fire. You're sending the wrong people. You don't send a priest to put out a fire. You just don't do that.
Well, to give the devil his due, and you're right, it is incumbent upon us, all of us, to know who to call, to learn the number for the Department of Mental Health, to figure it out, stick it on a bulletin board, stick it somewhere. And especially if you know you have someone who's not quite there, as you put it, the cheese is not on the cracker.
The cheese
we
sliding off
all
the cracker.
know 911. But 911 can also contact other people. 911 doesn't necessarily have to get you the police department. You can simply ask for an ambulance because somebody's having a breakdown. So you don't have to call for the police. You can call for an ambulance, and you can let the folks know, let the paramedics know when they get there that this person is having a mental break or whatever, and tell them that maybe you need a mental health professional. Maybe you need somebody who has something that can calm that individual down, as opposed to just sending the police. But most of the time, again, when people are in that situation, because they're not thinking of who to call, they just instantly call the police. And as you so rightly said, the police don't really have any training in anything like this. Remember, you mentioned a couple of years ago, the black man that they shot who was sitting next to somebody who was mentally disturbed.
Exactly.
And police were called, and they shot the man who was calming down the guy with the mental issue.
Right. And I think we can even take this a step further and take better care to keep these situations from happening by addressing the way we talk to each other and treat each other before anyone needs to get called. Like, I think about this conversation and I think about what I'm dealing with. And if I am just barely getting by being black in this country, imagine being black and being a woman in this country, you and I. Imagine being black and being queer in this country. Imagine being black and being anything other than a black straight man in this country, a black straight able-bodied man in this country. And you've got a myriad of systemic oppression embodied within one individual on top of every single type of trauma we've had to deal with racially. You got to deal with the sexism. You got to deal with the homophobia. You got to deal with the transphobia. You got to deal with the ableism. You have to deal with all of those things at the same time. So just taking better care to acknowledge that people are on specific journeys and have to deal with a myriad of social issues on top of their blackness, and talking to them with some facet of kindness would do wonders for people, I would imagine. And if we would just take the time to actually listen to people, I can't tell you how many times like somebody has called a black woman crazy for being angry when she's had valid reasons to be upset, because we stigmatize black women in their anger.
Yes.
Like that's just, imagine what that does to a person. Like, it's just, we need to stop invalidating people's feelings. Otherwise, we're never going to be able to do this work.
Right, exactly. And I'm gonna say this, and then I'm gonna say this and that. Oh, and we're coming up to our time here. I'm gonna say that we definitely have to get beyond this portion, like you just said, of trying to validate certain things. We should be beyond that. Okay. I don't hand out trophies if you participate. If you show up for work, you get paid for the work that you do. If you don't, you won't. End of story. And with saying that, we're gonna wrap it up here, because the conversation is so deep that we're definitely gonna pick this up next week. I want to thank you all for tuning in to iHeart Intellectual Radio, the Chronicles of Rohn. I want to thank my special guest, Jeremy, and my co-host, Karen Ford. Also, I want to say to my sponsor, and I do apologize for this, Nubian Beauty of Hair. Check out their website at luxuryhairdirect.com/buy. That's BY/Nubian4 . Remember to put that dot on there. And in closing, you can't get to heaven and grits. You can't eat religion and grits won't get you to heaven. Good night.